If you'd told me a year ago that my best friend would end up being the most confusing person in my life, I would have laughed and asked what kind of drugs you were on. But here we are. It started with a girl. Isn't that how it always starts? Her name was Jenna. Sweet blonde, did yoga on the quad, always smelled like coconut lotion. And more importantly, she was into me. Or at least she was for a few weeks last spring. We'd flirt after class, grab coffee, and even sat next to each other at a movie night once. But nothing ever really happened. Not because I didn't want it to, but because of Shawn. Shawn was my best friend. We met freshman year during orientation when he made fun of the way I arranged my books on the dorm shelf. Alphabetically, by genre. Total dork move, I know. But he didn't let it go. "Dude, are you building a bookstore or just trying to impress your future husband?" he said, grinning like he already knew the answer. That was Shawn. Loud, funny, always on, always moving. The kind of guy who could make a joke out of anything. He was on the rugby team. Tall, lean with this messy dark hair that never cooperated, and a jawline that belonged in a Calvin Klein ad. And of course, he was straight. Except, sometimes he wasn't. Or at least it felt like he wasn't. I don't even know how to explain it. Like how he'd always throw his arm around my shoulder at parties, not just for the photo op, but long after the camera flash. Or how he'd randomly say, "You smell good," before stealing my hoodie. Or how once, after we both got a little too drunk on tequila and gummy bears, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "If I ever went gay, you'd be the reason." I laughed it off, because what else was I supposed to do? But back to Jenna. She invited me to this art gallery opening. I didn't want to go. Modern art makes me feel dumb, but she said she wanted me there. Shawn found out and started acting weird immediately. "Dude, you're really gonna skip poker night with the guys for art?" he asked, lounging on the couch, tossing peanuts into his mouth. "It's not just art," I said. "She invited me." "Oh," he said dramatically. "You mean it's a date?" "I didn't say that." You didn't have to. There was something about the way he said it. Flat, almost annoyed, that made me pause. But before I could respond, he got up and disappeared into his room without another word. That night, I went to the gallery. It was awkward, full of pretentious people who used words like juxtaposition and emotive geometry, whatever the hell that meant. But Jenna seemed happy I was there. She touched my arm a few times, smiled a lot. At one point, she leaned in and said, "You've got really nice eyes." And I should have been flattered. I should have kissed her, or at least flirted back. But instead, all I could think about was Shawn, alone in the apartment, probably playing FIFA and pretending he wasn't annoyed I'd left him. I left early, made some excuse about not feeling well, and texted Jenna an apology before heading home. When I walked through the front door, Shawn was on the balcony with a beer, staring out at the city like some sad indie movie character. "You're back early," he said without turning around. "Yeah, wasn't really my scene." He nodded, then glanced over his shoulder at me. "So, did she kiss you?" "No." "Did you want her to?" I paused. "I don't know." And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Good." I stood there, trying to figure out what the hell that meant, but he just shrugged and said, "You hungry? I saved you some takeout." Like it was just a regular night. Like he hadn't just dropped a grenade on my brain. And that was the moment everything started to change. After that night, I tried to pretend everything was normal. Keyword, tried. Shawn didn't bring it up again. The good comment. The sudden intensity in his stare. The weird jealousy. He acted like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just had a moment. And honestly, maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe I misread it. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit what it could be. Still, things got off. Little things. He started texting me more when we weren't together. Just dumb stuff. Memes, TikToks, random updates. Not unusual for best friends, but the timing was weird. He'd send a message the moment I was out with someone else, like he had a sixth sense for when I wasn't home. Then there was the hoodie thing. I came home from class one afternoon to find him on the couch in my favorite navy hoodie, the one that still smelled like my cologne. He was curled up like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Just cold." "It's 78 degrees, he shrugged. "Your hoodie's just comfy. You want it back?" I hesitated. "Nah, keep it," he smirked, but didn't say anything else. That night, I found it draped over my desk chair, neatly folded. The next weekend, I matched with a guy on a dating app. His name was Theo. Cute, sweet, into indie music and long bike rides. We talked for a few days before he asked to meet up. I said yes. Shawn didn't say anything when I mentioned it, but he got quiet. And weird. The night of the date, I walked out of my room wearing a button-up I knew looked good on me. Fitted just right, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearm. I grabbed my keys and Shawn, sitting at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal, said, "Where are you headed?" I looked at him. He was pretending to be casual, but he'd stopped mid-chew. "Date." He raised an eyebrow. "With that Theo guy?" "Yeah." A beat. Then he nodded, returning to his cereal. "Cool." That was it. No teasing, no fake gagging. Just cool. I came back around midnight. The date was okay. Theo was nice. Too nice. Polite, sweet, but there was no spark. Nothing real. Shawn was still up, watching some late-night stand-up special. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes. "Hey," he said, eyes flicking toward me. "How'd it go?" "It was fine." "Fine?" he asked, sounding almost amused. "Yeah, just didn't click. He's not my type, I guess." Shawn nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting to hear that exact sentence. Then he patted the cushion next to him. "Want to watch the rest of this? It's that guy you like, the British dude who roasted the audience at that award show." I hesitated for a moment, then sat down. For the next 20 minutes, we watched TV like nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it. The space between us on the couch felt smaller than usual. Or maybe I was imagining that too. I caught him glancing at me out of the corner of my eye. Twice. And then the third time, I looked back. This time, he didn't look away. "What?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Nothing. You've got something on your face." I frowned and touched my cheek. "Where?" "Right there." He leaned in, like he was going to flick it off, but instead his thumb brushed my cheek in this slow, gentle motion that lasted just a little too long. "There," he said quietly. My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't move. Neither did he. And then he stood up. "I'm heading to bed," he said casually. "Night, man." And just like that, he disappeared down the hall. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, replaying that moment in my head. What the hell was going on? I had no idea. But I knew one thing. This wasn't normal best friend behavior anymore, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. The next few days were a mindfuck. Shawn didn't touch me again. Didn't make any more weird comments or steal any more hoodies. He was just Shawn. Back to normal. Almost too normal. I couldn't tell if I was relieved or disappointed. But I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before, like the way he lingered in the kitchen when I was making coffee, even though he didn't drink any, or how he'd always sit next to me on the couch. Not across, not diagonal, but always right next to me, sometimes close enough that our legs touched. And he'd never move away. One night, we were at a party, just a regular Friday night thing at a friend's apartment. Beer, music, sweaty college kids pretending they weren't stressed about finals. Shawn disappeared halfway through the night, and when I finally found him again, he was leaning against the balcony railing talking to this girl, pretty, tall, clearly into him. She was laughing at something he said, twirling a strand of her hair, the universal sign of, "Take me home." I watched for a second too long, then turned away and went back inside. I don't know why it bugged me. Shawn was straight, that's what I kept telling myself. Except when we got back to our apartment that night, he didn't mention the girl at all. Not even once. And we were both a little buzzed, not wasted, just loose enough to say stupid things without thinking. I was in the kitchen making a grilled cheese, my drunk food of choice, when he came in, grabbed a slice of cheese, and leaned against the counter like he owned the place. She was cute, I said, not looking up. Who? He asked. The girl on the balcony. Oh. He paused. Yeah, I guess. You guess? He shrugged. Not really my type. I turned to look at him. What is your type? Shawn met my eyes for a beat too long. And then he said, complicated. Something in my chest tightened. I turned back to my grilled cheese before I did something stupid. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body behind me. You're acting weird, I muttered. So are you. I'm not. You are, he said quietly. You've been off since that night. What night? You know what night. I swallowed hard. Nothing happened. His voice dropped lower. Didn't it? I turned around. He was right there. Too close. His eyes were locked on mine. Unreadable, but intense. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. He didn't move. Neither did I. And then the timer beeped. The oven. Grilled cheese saved me. I turned away, yanked the pan out, burned my hand a little. Shawn backed off like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just cornered me against a stove and stared at me like I was the only thing he could see. Night, man, he said casually, already walking down the hall. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart still racing, that question echoing in my head over and over. What the hell does he want from me? The next morning, I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing. But then I walked into the kitchen and saw Shawn making pancakes. He never makes pancakes. Morning, he said without turning around. You okay? I asked cautiously. Why wouldn't I be? I didn't answer. He flipped a pancake like it was just another Saturday. Shirtless, like always. Muscles on full display, like that wasn't its own form of psychological warfare. You want some? He asked, finally glancing at me. Sure. We ate in silence, which was weird for us. Normally, breakfast was filled with nonsense. Bad impressions, dumb arguments over syrup versus jam, him insisting that cereal was soup. Don't ask. But today, just quiet chewing and the occasional clink of forks. When I stood up to put my dish in the sink, Shawn spoke up. You ever think about it? I turned. Think about what? He didn't look at me. What it would be like. With a guy. My stomach dropped. Why are you asking me that? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He finally looked up. Because I've been thinking about it. There was no teasing in his tone, no sarcasm. Just those 4 words. Plain and honest. I've been thinking about it. I stood frozen by the sink, unsure of how to breathe, let alone respond. For how long? I asked quietly. A while, he admitted. I don't know. Since... I don't know when. There was a long pause. Is this about me? I asked, before I could stop myself. Shawn stared at me for a second too long, and then he said, yeah. Just that. One word. A gut punch. He looked down at his plate. I know it's weird. I've never really talked about this with anyone. I've never even kissed a guy. But every time you go out with someone else, it drives me crazy. I don't even understand it. It's like my brain knows I'm not supposed to care, but my body... He trailed off. My heart was in my throat. I thought you were straight, I said, barely above a whisper. I thought so too, he said. But then you moved in. And you kept doing all these things that made me feel things I wasn't ready to deal with. The way you smell. The way you laugh. The way you always bite your lip when you're thinking. I blinked. I do not bite my lip. You do, he said softly, almost smiling. and it drives me nuts. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to pull him close right then and there. The other part of me wanted to run, not because I didn't want him, but because I'd spent so long telling myself this wasn't possible, and now, suddenly, it was. He looked up at me, his expression open and raw in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, "but I know I don't want you with anyone else." That probably makes me sound like an asshole, but it's the truth. I crossed the room, slowly, heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear. When I stopped in front of him, he stood up too. We were eye to eye, closer than we'd ever been. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Shawn's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know, but I want to find out." We didn't kiss, not right away at least. It wasn't like a movie where someone makes a dramatic confession and then mouths collide in a sweeping romantic blur. No, what happened next was awkward. Hesitant. Real. We just stood there for a moment, like two idiots waiting for someone to cue us. Then Shawn said, "Do you wanna, sit or something?" I blinked. "Yeah, sure." We sat on the couch, not touching, just a solid 6 inches of space between us, like two kids on their first date. Shawn rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I'd seen him do 100 times before presentations or big rugby games. "This is weird, right?" he said. "Extremely." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't want to mess this up. Us, I mean. You're my best friend. And I'm also the guy you just said you've been thinking about." "Yeah," he said, a little breathlessly. There was a long pause. Then he said it. "I want to try something. If you're okay with it." I looked at him. "What kind of something?" His cheeks flushed, and for a second, he looked genuinely scared. "Just stay with me tonight. No pressure. No intimacy. Just be next to me. I just want to know what that feels like without pretending it doesn't mean anything." I wasn't expecting that. But somehow, it made perfect sense. "Okay," I said softly. That night, we got ready like it was any other evening. Brushed our teeth, turned off lights, made dumb jokes about how cold it always got in the apartment after midnight. But instead of going to our separate rooms, we both stood in the hallway, quiet. "You sure?" I asked. He nodded. We went to my room. We didn't touch. Not at first. He lay on his side, back to me. I stayed on mine, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. And then, slowly, like gravity pulling two things closer together, he shifted. First, his foot brushed mine. Then his hand found my arm. Then, without a word, he turned over and pressed his forehead lightly against my shoulder. I exhaled. His breath was warm on my skin, his presence overwhelming. He whispered, "Is this okay?" "Yeah." I breathed. Then he said the last thing I expected. "I'm scared." I turned slightly, just enough to see his eyes in the moonlight. "Me too," I said, but I didn't move. Neither did he. And even though we didn't kiss, didn't say anything else, just lay there, hearts racing, I'd never felt closer to him than I did in that moment. The morning after should have been awkward. 2 guys, 1 bed, no alcohol, no excuses. But it wasn't. When I woke up, Shawn was still there, tangled in the sheets beside me, arm draped over my waist like it had always belonged there. His face was calm, relaxed, almost unrecognizable from the version of him I'd grown used to seeing. No bravado, no jokes, just him. I stayed still, not wanting to wake him, but also not wanting to let go. Eventually, he stirred, blinked a few times, then looked at me like he wasn't sure if this was a dream or a problem. "Morning," I said quietly. "Morning," he mumbled, voice still rough from sleep. There was a moment of silence, the kind that could have gone either way, uncomfortable or intimate. Then he said, "You drool in your sleep." I groaned and rolled onto my back. "Really?" He grinned. "Just a little. It was kind of cute, actually." God, please don't tell anyone. He propped himself up on one elbow, still grinning. Who would I tell? My imaginary boyfriend? I paused. The word hung in the air. Boyfriend. Neither of us repeated it, but it didn't feel like a joke. He sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. So, what now? I looked at him. You're the one who wanted to figure this out. Yeah, but I didn't expect to get this far without panicking. And are you? He shrugged. A little, but also not as much as I thought. We made breakfast together this time, passing eggs and toast between us like we'd done it 100 times before. He bumped my hip when I reached for the jam. I flicked a crumb at his face. Stupid, easy, familiar. Only this time there was something new underneath all of it. After breakfast, he grabbed his phone and sank onto the couch, scrolling silently. I sat across from him, pretending to look at something on my laptop, but mostly just watching him. At one point, he looked up. Do you want to keep this just between us for now? My stomach sank a little. He must have noticed, because he added, It's not that I'm ashamed. I'm just still figuring things out. You know? I nodded. Yeah, I get it. And I did, but it still stung a little. Shawn leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I meant it, you know. I've never felt like this before. It's confusing, but it's also kind of exciting. That made me smile. Then let's take it slow, I said. No pressure, no labels. Just see where it goes. He looked relieved. Yeah, I like that. Later that day, we went for a walk, not holding hands or doing anything coupley. Just walking, shoulder to shoulder, like always. But I caught him glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, and once, when we crossed the street, his fingers brushed mine and didn't immediately move away. Small things. But they meant everything. It's been 3 months since that morning. 3 months of quiet changes, of subtle shifts, of slowly letting things be what they are, without needing to define every second of it. We never had the talk. No big dramatic moment where we sat down and labeled each other. It didn't feel necessary. What we were was already happening. Some nights, Shawn still slept in his room. Other nights, he'd crawl into mine without saying a word, just slip under the covers and wrap an arm around me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then, one night, he kissed me. It was raining, the kind of late summer thunderstorm that makes the whole world feel like it's paused. We were watching a movie, something dumb and old, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the couch under the same blanket. His fingers were tangled with mine, absent-minded, like he didn't even notice he was doing it. Then the power flicked off. Guess that's our cue, I said, glancing toward the dark TV. He didn't answer. Instead, he shifted, leaned in, and before I could even react, he kissed me. Not rough, not rushed. Just lips, brushing lips, tentative, like he was still asking if it was okay. I kissed him back. And that was it. The floodgate moment. The one that changed everything. From then on, things were still us. Just different. He still stole my hoodies. Still made terrible scrambled eggs. Still cracked dumb jokes at my expense. But now he kissed me goodbye when I left for class. Held my hand when we sat on the couch. Called me babe sometimes in that stupid, ironic voice of his, like he was still a little embarrassed but getting used to the idea. And yeah, he was still figuring things out. We both were. Some days he'd be confident, playful, like none of this was new. Other days he'd get quiet, overthink everything, ask me if this was real or just some weird college phase. But I never doubted it, because he was trying in all the ways that mattered. One night we were lying in bed, his head on my chest, thumb lazily tracing circles on my stomach, and he whispered, I never thought I'd be the guy who falls for his best friend. I smiled. You didn't fall. You tripped and landed on me. He laughed, kissed my chest, and said, best landing I've ever had. So yeah, maybe we didn't see it coming. Maybe it wasn't planned or perfect or textbook. But it was real. And somehow, against all odds, the guy that first thought I'd only ever get to love in secret, he ended up choosing me too.